Ever since Hitler came to power in 1933, writers have been trying to fathom him and his personal life, and he is already the subject of major biographies by Alan Bullock, Joachim Fest, and Ian Kershaw. These publications and dozens more seek to explain Hitler. As Ron Rosenbaum's book puts it, Hitler begs for an explanation and perhaps always will, for his biography remains absurd and abhorrent even when we have all the evidence. It's hard to believe that such a person could wield so much power. How could the world have allowed it to happen? And always the unspoken fear. Could it happen again? When Adolf Hitler reached 30, his life was more than half done, yet he hadn't left a trace on Earth. Without any close pals, he could have easily been a virgin at the time. He had always wanted to be a painter or an architect when he was younger, but he was denied twice from Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts. He had never worked a day in his life, and in the years leading up to World War I, he scraped by selling his artwork, particularly paintings and postcards, on the streets of Vienna. When war broke out in 1914, he joined the German army as a private, and he was still a private when the war ended 4 years later. He was never elevated owing to his quote-unquote lack of leadership qualities. Yet, a few decades later, Nazi followers would be cheering for this nameless failure to lead them to victory in the Second World War. Hitler took on the role of Chancellor of Germany at the age of 43, and by the time he was 52, he could claim that he was the most powerful man in the history of Europe, having amassed an empire that covered the whole of the continent. Hitler's rapid ascent to power and ultimate catastrophic collapse was a phenomena that had never before been seen in human history. All that has been documented in a number of books, but his personal life was a bit of a mystery. In general, people described him as being highly polite to strangers, a lively conversationalist at mealtimes, and a real joy to be around in the presence of children. He enjoyed talking about and going to the opera. Having said all that, he had very few genuine friends. Those he picked up as friends had to have something in common with him. Before he became the Führer, he used to obsessively visit opera performances with his mate, and why, during his reign, he was friends with the architect Albert Speer. Hitler was quite interested in learning more about it. His personal valet, Heinz Linde, wrote a book about his years till the very end being Hitler's personal servant. Hitler had a passion for eavesdropping on rumors and liked the company of the spouses and children of his closest advisors. Albert Speer and Martin Bormann's kids regularly visited the Berghof. There are actual newsreels that show Hitler hosting tea parties for kids and giving gifts to young children throughout his reign. Hitler had a modest bedroom and a small wardrobe at the Berghof. He enjoyed being a vegetarian, and he wouldn't let his guests smoke around him, which also translates to rarely drinking alcohol. He was a very different person in his own home, surrounded by close friends and family, than he seemed in TV footage taped in front of large audiences. Low-key and self-deprecating, he was also an avid fan of humor. Besides that, he enjoyed taking car drives to the nearby village and going for nighttime strolls with his chauffeur and Herr Linde, particularly when the goal was to avoid being recognized by anyone. At home, people could talk about almost anything except for the Jewish question. Baldur von Schirach was a leader of the Hitler Youth and Gaultier of Vienna. His family spent a lot of time in the Berghof before and after the war. Unfortunately for his wife, she questioned Hitler directly about why the Jews in Vienna were being mistreated and if he knew anything about that. Hitler was enraged, even though she was one of the few women who were allowed to speak to the Führer on a first-name basis. He ordered her out of the Berghof immediately and permanently banned her from it. This meant his character inside his residence was a mixture of banality and horror, just like his political life. Hitler's bohemian lifestyle was routinely thwarted by tedious office work. Hitler's valet would quietly knock on his door and serve him a simple breakfast of tea and cookies when he heard him moving about his room. And after Hitler had finished eating, his servant would bring all of Germany's newspapers and read summaries of the foreign press. This would be followed by signing paperwork kept to a minimum by his aides. The next step was daily briefings on the war, which only included Hitler's most senior generals. But Goebbels was often invited to be briefed about the viewpoint of the Nazi Party, which meant that Hitler's own perception was emphasized. Hitler would use lunch for utilitarian reasons, like communicating his main ideas to his close group. He would savor a cup of tea in the afternoon. His longtime party friends and others invited visitors gave them the opportunity to kick back and relax over afternoon tea. As long as the women, who were often the spouses of high-ranking party leaders, did not voice their views, he found great pleasure in entertaining them. Curiously, this was a habit he shared with Churchill. The conversation should be an all-male affair. While staying at Berchtesgaden, Hitler would take a brief stroll as his only form of physical activity. In the late afternoon, he would spend his time either dictating to his secretaries on official issues or meeting important guests. The evening meal was often a buffet, with the exception of Hitler, who would have a vegetarian dish specifically prepared for him. During times of peace, Adolf Hitler and his wife Eva Braun would go to their bedroom together. But when war broke out, this habit became rare and was mostly unnoticed by those who were there. After dinner, Hitler would sit down with his generals for long war conferences that lasted between 2 and 3 hours, throughout which they would decide even the most minute details of the conflict. He shared Clemenceau's view that war is too important a matter to be left to generals. When these meetings ended before the war, Hitler would watch 1 or 2 movies, usually musicals. After the movies were over, Hitler would invite a small group to stay and listen to a 1 or 2 hour speech about everything from Christianity to dog breeding. By now, it was 2 or 3 a.m., and the guests were free to leave. Hitler went back to his bedroom, not with his wife, fighting off insomnia as best he could. Even in bed, he would spend hours reading novels or books. Many times he would fade away for hours at a time while reading these things, and he would not allow himself to be disturbed, even if it was something important. It's easy to see that Hitler had no interest in any kind of romantic or sexual connections. His biography by Joachim C. Fest portrays him as an arrogant and extremely serious guy who was fascinated by his own ideas from an early age. While his colleagues were talking about ladies, Hitler was only interested in opera and architecture. The more he became disinterested in dating. In the political sphere, he was very proud of the fact that he didn't have a private life. Hitler was a bachelor and seemed to have no lovers or girlfriends, in contrast to the majority of his colleagues who were fathers of large families. He considered himself an ineligible bachelor since he was the kind of guy who didn't want to dedicate himself to a single individual, but rather to a whole nation. But this picture, like so many others created by the Third Reich, was deceptive and intended to deceive. Hitler, who was said to have been unmarried his whole life, was actually involved with a number of different women throughout his lifetime. The specifics of these affairs shed light on a distinct side of him, one in which his desire for power and control extends into the realm of his personal life. Each of his relationships was more problematic than the last, and all ended in suicide. The day before Hitler committed suicide, he had Blondie, his German shepherd, poisoned so that he could test the cyanide before he and his new wife Eva Braun took it themselves.